Welcome, everyone, to the P.A.S. Report podcast. This is your host, Nick Giordano, and make sure that you follow and subscribe to the podcast so you never miss an episode. Also, visit the P.A.S. Report website, pasreport.com, and share this episode with your family, friends, and on social media. I got a fantastic guest lined up, and that's why you want to share it, because you want to inform everyone about what's going on. So I want to welcome today's guest. I have author of Radical Betrayal, How Liberals and Neoconservatives Are Wrecking American Exceptionalism, Anders Edwardsson. Welcome to the P.A.S. Report. How are you today?
Well, I'm doing fine. Thank you for having me.
Well, I'm glad you could be here because your book hits on a lot of notes that I always speak about, and this idea of American exceptionalism. You call it a radical betrayal. So can you explain to the audience what you mean by radical betrayal?
Well, to put that in context and make it understandable, we must recall that up until around 1900, we didn't really have what we mean with a political left and right in America. Sure, the political parties had different opinions about slavery, about tariffs, silver coining, whatever, but they were both center-right parties, true to the founding fathers' form of American exceptionalism or Americanism. That meant the American system not being involved too much in world affairs, free market, small government, low taxes, few regulations. But around 1900, this unity started to break down. On what we can call the right, the Republicans started to distance themselves from George Washington's isolationist foreign policy by starting the Spanish-American War to free Cuba and gain some footholds in the Caribbean and the Pacific. On the left, the Democrats, bogged down by their support for slavery during the Civil War and subsequent support for Ku Klux Klan and Jim Crow and segregation after the Civil War, they started to rebrand themselves as a more traditional left-wing party. Meaning that they left small government, low taxes, few regulations behind and started moving towards more statist opinions and policies. And what happened here is that both these leftist and the activist foreign policy guys on the other side, which by the way most leftists supported, they are radicals by American standards, traditional American standards. And as the 20th century moved on, these two fringes started to eat in and take and become more and more important in both parties. And here we are today with a welfare warfare state that costs more than we can pay for it, and yeah, you know how it is today.
Well, I like that the way you just phrased that, the welfare warfare state. In all your analysis and understanding of history, has any country been able to sustain a welfare warfare state?
No, not at least not staying a low tax, few regulation order at the same time. But there is, well, of course, the Soviet Union, and other communist countries, they are effective welfare warfare states.
And it doesn't work out well for them. It didn't work out well.
It doesn't work out that well, as we know. So the thing is, the US around, say, 1970, 1965, 1970, the US, if it had just made up its mind if it should be a warfare superpower or a federal welfare state, much of today's budget deficits and national debt would never have occurred. But drive down both these roads at the same time, it simply costs too much money.
It certainly does. I mean, we're seeing the debt explode, the interest that we're paying on this debt explode. And it's not that any of the politicians are really talking about fiscal responsibility. I mean, in fact, they're always talking about more emergency supplementals. We got a crisis here and a crisis there. Aren't there always going to be crises that you have to tackle?
Oh, yes. Politics is crisis. Politicians love crises because then they can say, oh, we must raise taxes and forbid that and do this. And it's just the way politics works, unfortunately.
Yeah,
Modern
and
politics,
they
at least.
continue to usurp the people's authority. Now, over the 21st century, right? The last 23 years, obviously, we've seen dramatic shifts. You had 9/11, then you had the mortgage meltdown crisis here in America, and then you had the election of Donald Trump, COVID. When you look at all these things that took place, you explain in your book how Trump essentially was elected, why he was elected. It was the abandonment of both political parties to their constituents and the needs of America. But you talk about the visceral reaction to Trump, and you actually go beyond the media aspect, the academic aspect. And can you explain how the Trump haters go far beyond just the normal surface level discussions?
Well, I mean, that you only need to recall that picture of this screaming woman in standing on her knees in DC on January 20th, 2017. I don't know if we can maybe pull it up for your listeners. I mean, Trump became, because Trump he has many strengths, a few weaknesses, but because he head-on took on this, we can call it the marriage of scorpions between Democrat welfarists and neocon warmongers. They basically accept each other's excesses just because they know that if we give you this, you will give us that. And it had worked like that for 30, 40 years. So people couldn't see anything else than that, beyond that. And that Trump challenged both at the same time. As this woman exemplifies, it was too much for a lot of people on both sides. From day one, they tried to derail his presidency, get him impeached, you name it. And it continues to this day. I mean, just think about it. If I had told you, say, 20 years ago, or even 10 years ago, that the party in power of the White House would be behind trying to get their obvious opponents in next year's presidential election locked up, you would have probably said you need help. But that's the banana republic level this has come down to. But again, as I also underline in my book, Trump is just a token, a symbol of this. The bigger problem that he reflects goes at least 100 years back in time.
It really is amazing because 10 years ago, if you would have told me a lot of things, I would have said it's not possible. The American reaction to COVID and how so many people just blindly obeyed the decrees. When you look at President Trump and how he was targeted, I would have said that would have never happened. But the politicians, they don't like disruption of the status quo. I mean, that's what they want, the gravy trains to keep flowing. Now, when it comes to President Trump or former President Trump, one of the things that concerned me when he was first elected was, what's his foreign policy going to look like? As a businessman, foreign policy is easy. You're bringing jobs and investment to foreign countries. So yeah, they're going to do what you want those countries. But as a president of the United States and diplomacy, it's very difficult to get another country to do what's in your interest, and that may go against their interest. But he reshaped foreign policy. And can you explain to the audience about how his foreign policy was impactful, and then the transition to Joe Biden and everything we're witnessing today?
Well, that's very hard to do in 2 minutes, but I can give it a try. What Trump did was challenging the status quo, as you just said, and the status quo meant active and generous American support to certain wars. Since the Clinton era, it was very much about globalism and so-called free trade deals. That was not so much free trade deals as sellouts to countries like China and others. And he took on both sides of foreign policy, so to speak, both the military side and the trade economic side. And he did, I must say, he did a really good job. He amazed a lot of us by simply transferring his business skills into diplomatic skills. That was a lot of people, and I was with you. I was a little, business and diplomacy is not really the same thing, but they obviously work very much the same thing. It's always trade-offs, very few completely black and white issues. And I mean, just those pictures of him walking into North Korea with whatever Kim it is right now. I mean, it would have been unthinkable. And the world was generally at peace. Putin was so quiet for 4 years that you wondered if he was still in office. The Europeans started grudgingly, but they started to pay more for their own defense through NATO, or live up to NATO's 2%, and so on and so forth. And I don't know, maybe Mercury went into retrograde on January 20th, 2021, because since then everything has just gone downhill. We have war in Ukraine, we have war in the Middle East. The world economy is struggling, much because of COVID, of course, but also it just was like that. Going back to normal, as the election of Biden was all about, actually turned out to be just back to bad normal. It's hard to explain.
Well, sure. I think you're hitting it exactly right. I mean, when Trump was the president of the United States, I mean, the amount of stability around the world in the international system, which does get chaotic, was truly amazing. And the second Joe Biden came into office as president of the United States, we've seen the system become very unstable, as you alluded to. We have conflicts, Russia invading Ukraine. You have the Israeli-Gaza conflict with Hamas conducting savage terror attacks. Most people aren't paying attention to Azerbaijan and Armenia. They're not paying attention to Serbia and Kosovo. Obviously, we are paying attention to China's aggression, growing aggression, not just towards Taiwan, but also towards Vietnam and the Philippines that nobody really talks about. And we know that when economies decline, when you have weak leadership, that there's going to be a power vacuum that opens up, and we're witnessing it today. Are you concerned that all these conflicts around the world begin to merge into one?
There is, of course, a risk, but they are so different, so diverse in origin and nature. And I mean, why would the Israel-Hamas conflict merge with the war in Ukraine? I don't really see a how that maybe if Putin went full in on Hamas side or something like that. But
Well, the way I'm thinking,
he's too smart to do that.
the way I'm thinking is if we get sucked into, let's say Israel and Iran end up going to war, Iran's battle plan is to attack U.S. military installations right away and draw us into the Middle East in a full ground war. Well, that would distract from Russia, Ukraine. Obviously, we wouldn't be able to give Ukraine the enormous weaponry and money that we're giving them. And so Russia will be more forceful with Ukraine, freaking out Europe, where Europe will go to war with Russia. So that's why I mean by merging into one, that it provides opportunity for the adversaries to push the envelope, knowing that we wouldn't be able to respond.
Yes, okay, sorry, I partly misunderstood you. And yes, it will be my honest conviction until the day I die that somehow Putin is the man behind the curtain when it comes to this Israeli-Hamas thing. What happened on October 7th have all his fingerprints all over it. It was sudden, it was big, it was spectacular, it was done without any regard to human life or stuff like that. I think somehow he has been involved in the planning of this. But as I said, he's smart enough to stay way out of, so he can't be formally accused of it. So of course it's partly a distraction from Ukraine. It also fitted the Palestinians' will to or attempt to stop the since Trump's days ongoing peace process between Israel and countries like Saudi Arabia. As I understand it, they were close to coming to a formal recognition just weeks or months before this started. So, as always, there is not only one reason for this, but so just to return to your question, yes, these things are intertwined, but I don't think at least not what I can see now, that they will merge into one giant conflict. The world may be one giant conflict area, but it will be a lot of small and mid-sized wars and conflicts. Yeah. Where the different sides can support each other. I mean, Putin has got support from North Korea and Iran and stuff like that, but I don't think they will merge into one as they did in 1914 or 1939.
Well, I think it's interesting. So when we look at the Saudi-Israeli dynamic, where they were fairly close to getting an agreement where Saudi Arabia would sign on to the Abraham Accords, what I find interesting is that agreement would have been signed on to in 2020, 2021, had the Biden administration not isolated Saudi Arabia and actually pushed them away. So we see one of the bigger foreign policy failures of this administration. And how did Afghanistan figure in as a historian? I mean, Afghanistan, and I'm not saying we should have stayed in Afghanistan. Afghanistan was always a losing proposition. But when you announce we're withdrawing and the Taliban's able to recapture the country within a week, while we're still there withdrawing, and we have to get permission from the Taliban to get our troops out, and we spent 20 years of war, trillions of dollars, thousands of lives affected, tens of thousands of lives affected on American soldiers. How does that play in as a historian when you look at this sole superpower of the world, and then we saw those images coming out of Afghanistan? Do you think that was, and this is speculation, of course, but that was Putin, Xi Jinping, the Ayatollah all saying that America's done?
No, I mean, it's just to realize, just to try to make this understandable for people who hasn't been in politics or studied it as closely as you and me have done. Top politics is very much like a schoolyard. And as we know, on schoolyards, the bullies rules. The biggest and brutest bully rule the schoolyard. And when you get a wimp like Biden in, the bullies on the schoolyard is from day one. I said, here's a new guy. He looks wimpy. They are testing him, and that's what they started with already in Afghanistan. By the way, I think Putin may have been involved in that one too, in his own undercover way. But that was Biden showed the first time push came to shove that he was a wimp. He's weak as a leader. So and things have just spiraled from there. Putin said, "Yep, let's take back this parts we want from Ukraine." Hamas started to say, "Now we can derail this peace process." It's just. If you don't, I mean, the world may look enormously big and complex and complicated and everything, but it all comes down in the end to individuals. And when you have a weak individual in the most powerful and important position in the world, you as president, things tend to go south. It's that simple.
It is. And there is simplicity to international politics to a certain degree. And when we're examining the idea of Trump, it's interesting because obviously he was an unknown factor, but there's something in the American psyche and the American culture that shifted, right? You know, people, and I understand it, they didn't like tweets that Trump would send out. They didn't like the way he spoke or the things he did. But when you're dealing with international leaders, sometimes you need an a-hole as president, right? Sometimes you need that tough guy as president because, as you just stated, with Biden, we see the weakness. Now, that gets me to the all-important question, is the American people. The American people, obviously, the mindset has shifted. And the mindset has shifted because everything is based on emotion today. It's not based on reason or logic or even common sense. Everything becomes an emotional argument. Is there a way to turn this around?
Oh, yes, there is. I'm a born optimist. So, absolutely, this can be turned around. If that means that Trump must be re-elected or someone else, I just think, but firm, strong, clear leadership is alpha and omega in this. Whoever replaces Biden must be clear as crystal and strong as iron, so to speak, because otherwise America and the West generally will be continue to be kicked around on this schoolyard by bullies like China and Russia and Iran and North Korea. World politics is very much compared to economics. Politics is a zero-sum game. My gain is your loss, and there is only 100% power in the world. And if we don't take it and hold on to what we have, other people will start to eat into it. So again, whoever replaces Biden must be strong and clear and prepared to do whatever's needed.
And how do we do it? I mean, I just released an episode a couple of weeks ago about how the West is committing so many self-inflicted wounds. It's not outside adversaries that are damaging Western civilization. It's coming internally from ideologues, from academia, from the media, from the far leftist groups that exist. Do you think that these leftist groups really have a lot of power, or do you think they're just the loudest voices and they're a fringe minority?
They are numerically, they are a fringe minority. They have always been, and that's why the traditional Western left believed in Marx and thought that history was moving their way. They lost that conviction, started to lose it already in the 60s and 70s when Mao's and Stalin's crime became more broadly known and noticed. And they definitely lost it in 1989 with the fall of communism. But since the 70s, I don't know if you have heard the term the long march through the institutions.
Mm-hmm.
The 1968 radicals put on jacket and tie and started doing careers as bureaucrats, journalists, normal left, middle of the road, left wing politicians, and even businessmen. And it's now them, their kids, and even now they are on the way into the third generation of grandkids of this cabal from the late 60s, early 70s of postmodernist radicals that they don't really know what they want. They just know that they hate what we have now. They hate the bourgeoisie center right societies we have in Europe and North America. They want to replace it with God knows what. But Bernie Sanders, AOC, these people, what do they really want? They want America to look like Sweden. Well, Sweden is literally blowing up right now because of immigration and other crazy issues the last 30 years. So it's just this. It's more a attitude than a political program. It's definitely not a conspiracy in the hard meaning of the world, that everything that happens today is orchestrated by a group in a smoky room somewhere in the UN building. It's just millions of like-minded people in different countries
that have had it too easy and haven't had to sacrifice.
Yeah.
That's what it comes down to. I mean, and that's unfortunately the reality that they're living in, is that they don't have a plan for future governance. They just hate the United States. They hate Western civilization, Western culture, simply because they're told to, essentially by the academic field and others, that we're the cause of all the evils in the world. Meanwhile, they never set foot in any of these other countries. We should make that a requirement, a high school graduation requirement, that all high school seniors have to spend 3 weeks in like one of the worst countries we could find, just so they see the way the real world works. Anders, I really enjoyed this conversation. Radical Betrayal, How Liberals and Neoconservatives Are Wrecking American Exceptionalism. We're going to have links up at the PAS Report website to get the book, PASreport.com. Anders, thank you so much for joining me, and I'd love to have you back on to further the discussion.
Absolutely. I would be glad to be back, and thank you for having me.